Is your business struggling to stand out from the crowd online? At Webamax, we specialize in turning clicks into customers. From SEO and PPC to social media management and stunning web design, we've got you covered. Boost your online presence and drive real results. Ready to take your business to the next level? Visit Webamax.com. That's Webimax.com for a free digital analysis. Roll the web with Webamax.com.
The following is a high five moment from highfivecasino.com.
Welcome to Burger Yippee. Would you like a hot apple pie today?
Yes, yeah, I won! Woohoo!
So that's a yes on the apple pie?
I just went big time playing High Five Casino on my phone. Real cash prizes, free daily rewards, over 1,200 games. Yeah!
So yes or no on the apple pie?
Whoa! I won again!
I'll take that as a yes. Drive around.
Have you had your high five moment today? Only at highfivecasino.com.
High Five Casino is a social casino. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Play responsibly. Conditions apply. See website for details.
High Five Casino. High Five Casino.
High Five Casino is a social casino with real prizes and big Vegas hits at highfivecasino.com. The hottest games right from Vegas, and all winnings go straight to your bank account. Hundreds of exclusive games, free daily rewards, and come back to get free coins every 4 hours. Only at highfivecasino.com.
High Five Casino is a social casino. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Play responsibly. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details at high5casino.com.
High Five Casino. High Five Casino.
High Five Casino is a social casino with real prizes and big Vegas hits at highfivecasino.com. The hottest games right from Vegas, and all winnings go straight to your bank account. Hundreds of exclusive games, free daily rewards, and come back to get free coins every 4 hours. Only at highfivecasino.com.
High Five Casino is a social casino. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Play responsibly. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details at high5casino.com.
High Five Casino.
Hello there, Duke fans, and welcome to episode number 631 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. This is a full episode, ladies and gentlemen, because we have a fascinating interview that we just recorded with Brendan Marks of The Athletic. Before we get to that, I am Donald One. I'm your host for this episode. Although I'm not going to be doing most of the talking, Brendan will be. We also have Jason Evans, who is here. He helps provide some of the questions when someone like Brendan comes on. But Jason, how's it going today? This interview was fantastic that we just did.
Yeah, it's going great. I can't, let's not banter too much because it is a full interview, and some of the insight he gives us into Duke basketball and the transfers and the makeup of this roster are just nuggets of gold. And I want everybody out there to get to hear him right away.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to get right into it. Our interview with Brendan Marks of The Athletic.
Brendan, I want to start with this, which is, I feel like if we're just talking transfer portal, Duke had a pretty great transfer portal season. Compare it. I know we're mostly going to talk about Duke here, but compare it to the rest of the ACC. Like if you had to pick who did their best job of filling their holes and things like that. I mean, I guess Louisville is best because Louisville lost everybody. But where does Duke rank? I feel like this is a really, really great portal season for Duke.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that, in terms of bringing in high-end star power, not necessarily, but that's not what this Duke roster needed for next season. It didn't need any more stars. It has enough stars either returning or coming back or coming in as freshmen. And so really what you wanted to do, and what John Shire and his staff, I think, did, was you wanted to perfectly complement all of the people that you already had that you could build on as infrastructure. And in that respect, I think Duke hit it out of the park. Again, other schools, you mentioned a Louisville, they may have brought in some flashier names, some bigger people, but in terms of actually rounding out your rotation, adding the things that Duke in the past couple of years, frankly, has lacked, you added depth, you added experience. Those are things that especially last year kind of came back to hurt the Blue Devils. I think it was exactly what John Shire and his staff wanted to do. So very nice portal haul. And even if it may have been a little bit unfamiliar for fans in terms of just how much turnover there was.
You mentioned some of the items that were on the agenda for John Shire and his coaching staff when discussing this transfer portal season. For us, we've discussed it at the top. It felt like toughness was the number one thing that they were looking for. And when you think about getting Malik Brown, Mason Gillis, Sion James, and Cameron Sheffield, do you think when you look at that checklist, can you mark that objective complete? And also, what kind of toughness do those kind of guys bring to the roster? Because of course there's my bad boys, Pistons, right? And then there's a different type of toughness that is physical. What kind of toughness do you think that those four guys add to this roster?
Yeah, I think a lot of what John Shire and his staff wanted to do this summer is they've now had two different teams that very distinct styles that they've played with, that they've built these rosters around. And I think you can very much see that this year, relating to that toughness, they wanted to build it much more in the version of the first team that John Shire had, which was length, defense, toughness, grittiness. This team is going to be, first of all, gigantic next year. There's not a single rotation player under 6'5". I mean, they are just.
Yeah, we talked about it's crazy how big they are.
Yeah,
I can't recall. I honestly cannot recall a college basketball team that was this big.
Yeah, I saw a stat from Andrew Weatherman, who does some college basketball data stuff, a couple of weeks ago, and I think it was something like, Florida State in like 2010 was the last team to have no players who played at least 10 minutes or more who were under 6'5". So it's been at least a decade. I mean, it's been a very long time, but it's not just the length. It is what that length enables you to do, and it allows you to be an absolute defensive menace, and it allows you to be tough. And I think, last year, for as incredible as Duke's offense could be at times, for the brief flashes that we saw throughout the season when all of the guards were hitting, when Kyle Filipowski was at his best, when he was hitting from the outside, being a playmaker inside, you didn't necessarily see the toughness. And some of that is just based on and predicated on what you can do physically. And so I definitely think they've gone out and they've gotten toughness. And again, that goes back to the experience piece too. You're bringing in, two guys who are graduates, two guys in Mason Gillis and Sion, who they're in the last year of college basketball. Mason Gillis obviously just played at the pinnacle of the sport, played in the national championship game with Purdue. Malik Brown is a guy, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but has multiple years of eligibility, which I think is a great bonus as well. But all ACC defensive team is used to being a role player. I just think from that perspective, like the mindset of all the guys they brought in, like as much as the physical toughness and the versatility and the length is going to be huge for their defensive aptitude, the fact that they've brought in these guys who mentally are like willing to compete, are willing to muck it up, like that's what this team is going to be next year. They're going to win a lot of games like 65-50. And that's okay because they'll be winning those games. And so I think in terms of toughness, yes, the physical element of it is there, but definitely the mental toughness and being willing to compete and fight for a role.
When we discussed Malik Brown joining this team, which feels like yesterday, but it was like at this point almost a couple months ago, I used the words muck it up. And so I'm glad that you use the same words to kind of describe the type of physicality. And again, like the grinded out type of games where, those games are usually the ones that are the close ones. The fact that we have a team that could be physical in those moments to get to that point is great. Now, the one thing about transfers is it doesn't matter how many transfers you bring in if they don't integrate themselves into the current squad. From what you've been hearing, how the players of this new 24-25 roster getting along, coming together in these early weeks that they've had, with practice and the pickup games that they've been doing?
Yeah, well, I even go back to before these guys got in when Duke was still in the recruiting process with a couple of them, specifically with like Mason Gillis. He was the guy who I heard the most chatter about early on. He was sort of, there were a number of big, sharpshooting 3-and-D kind of guys that they were looking at. And he was the one whose name came up most frequently, at least in everything that I had heard. And a lot of that was because like, if you talk to the people at Purdue, he was the guy in that locker room who held it all together. Zach Edey was the best player. You had the two dynamic cards. Trey Kaufman-Renn was there as like the next sort of guy. But it was Gillis who had been a starter, had not been a starter, had played a lot, had only played a little bit, had his moments, also had times when he was relegated to nothing. He was kind of the glue who held it all together. And so I think in that respect, he has already started to fit in really well. Malik Brown, like, last year I was saying if Syracuse could get all those guys back, and obviously they didn't, but if Syracuse could have gotten all those guys back, I would have really liked the roster. Again, he was another one of those early targets, just somebody that they wanted. And again, has played some 4, has played some 5, and most importantly, is used to being in a role, is not expecting to come in and be, offensive option number one, two, or even three. Is somebody who is coming in and the staff, John Shire, can sit across from him and say, Malik, if you come in, you do everything that we're asking you to do, and you are better than everybody else here, you're going to start. And if you're not, then you're not going to start. It's going to be a competition. And that guy says, that's exactly what I want. That's all that I want. That I think was a big thing with him. And then, funny enough, Sion obviously came on a little bit later in the recruiting process, was the last of the three to sort of come in. In terms of like character, he was one of Tulane's student representatives for the NCAA. By all accounts, an incredibly, incredibly high character guy, but also someone who, we think about Tyrese Proctor. He's going to be the oldest guy in this backcourt. Great. It's great to have a junior back. Caleb Foster obviously was a sometime starter. It's good to have the experience back. But this is a guy who, those are still two relatively young players. Sion is an older guy who's going to hold them accountable and knows how good they can be. And, quite frankly, is not going to take any crap if those guys are in any way shirking what they're supposed to be doing. So, I think each of them in their different ways, brings a different dynamic personality wise to the locker room. But, again, especially with what Duke has coming back and what it has coming in from the freshman ranks, John Shire and his staff had to be really selective, not just about the player, but about the personality they were bringing in. And I think all three guys, the things they have in common, they're mature, they're experienced, they're comfortable playing a role, and they're willing to hold other people accountable. And, especially for a guy like Mason Gillis, having played at the utmost, hierarchy, the mountaintop of college basketball, for a young team that's trying to get to that point, that's as invaluable as anything.
So I want to talk a little bit more about what you heard about how the process of finding these guys, because look, we all experienced it. The transfer portal, this thing just happens so fast, especially when compared to the process of recruiting Cooper Flagg was multiple years. The process of recruiting Sion James was probably maybe multiple weeks. I mean, it's a little bit crazy. What have you heard? What do you know about how Duke is able to vet these guys, to understand them? You've talked so much about their character. Obviously, you can call up an opposing coach. We've heard that John Shire was on the phone to the Purdue staff like the moment Mason Gillis was available. Is that all there is to it, or is there something more? I mean, some of these guys didn't even take a visit to Duke before committing. Am I right?
Yeah, that I will say that is becoming more commonplace. And, my colleagues and I are working on a big project right now that should be out in the next couple of weeks about, the transfer portal and actually how it works and logistically. And, I will say not specifically as it pertains to these guys, but like the number of stories you hear of guys who are either getting contacted or making it known that they will be available, so to speak, as early as like Christmas is crazy. Not saying that. Yeah, not saying that's the case with these guys, but just, I talked to a player maybe 2 weeks ago, and he said, excuse me, he said that when he came home for Christmas, he went for a workout with his AAU coach and just, get up some shots, get in a workout while he was home for the holidays. And the AAU coach was like, hey, so I've heard from these 20 schools already, any of them who I should like respond to and get back to and, tell them that potentially you're going to be interested. So tampering has always been there, but it's a little bit different now. I think as far as these guys go, I think that, and we'll get into more of this. The first thing is understanding what you're losing. So I think John Shire and his staff knew that Jared McCain and Kyle Filipowski, Kyle Filipowski going back to last year. I mean, if not for the hip surgery, I don't believe he would have been back for his sophomore season whatsoever. Jared McCain, again, got off to a slow start, but by December, January, especially by February, he starts having 30-point games. He starts, he hits 8 threes. See ya. Goodbye. Enjoy the NBA. As for the rest of the guys, it's about having those conversations. And obviously, a lot of those guys ended up going in the transfer portal and figuring out, okay, are you staying? Are you going? Can I convince you to stay? Do I want to convince you to stay? That's an important piece of it. And then you sort of build your board from there. Duke going into it knew they needed to lose some bodies just from a scholarship standpoint, just from like the numbers crunch. I saw a lot of fans, especially as some of these, high profile recruits are going in the portal. They're like, oh my God, how can we lose that guy? And it's like, well, because that guy wasn't good enough to play this year and he probably wasn't going to be good enough to play next year. I think especially This year's a little bit different. I don't know that this year is the year that you can take and say this is what Duke's roster building strategy is going to be every season under Shire, because everything is so targeted towards maximizing Cooper Flag this season. So I do think that makes this a little bit of a unique year. But once they figured out what they were losing, it becomes okay. We've only got so many spots. We've got reasonably 3 spots that we're going to fill. We're going to have, to use NBA terms, we're going to have vet minimum guys at the end of the bench. That's a Cam Sheffield. Every team has started to do that. They're basically, there's not enough NIL dollars to actually field 13 players. You're not going to play 13 players. Doesn't matter. Once they figured out they could only have those 3, you look at what you've got and you see, okay, we know that we need more 3-point shooting. We know that we need age. We know that we need experience. And we know that we need more front court help. So Malik Brown is a guy they identified early on as somebody who can play some 5, can play some 4. Kaman Malwalk is going to be, the guy at center, but he's raw. I want fans to be very aware of that. Like, it's going to be, if you thought Derek Lively was a work in progress, get ready. There's gonna be some learning curve here. The guy has all the physical tools in the world, but it's gonna take time.
Brendan, I don't know if you've seen this movie. It's obviously a classic, but are we talking about Neon Bedeau and Blue Chips type of raw, or what's the level? What's the grade here?
Yeah, I don't know quite about that, but this is a guy who picked up the sport a little bit later on. Again, has all the tools. But Derek Lively was a guy who in high school mostly played on the perimeter, and Duke had to teach him the timing with how to pick and roll. And obviously with Luka Doncic, he's figured that out just fine. But it took time. I mean, reasonably, he was not helping Duke in games until January. I think you're probably talking about a similar trajectory. I do think that without the presence of like a Ryan Young, Kaman's going to have to play through more of those mistakes. He also has Cooper Flag next to him, who's going to clean up a lot of stuff defensively. But just beware. And so Malik Brown is a guy who comes in and can immediately solidify either front court spot if you need him to. Can play some 5, can play some 4, continues to go with the length, obviously has the pedigree as an all ACC defender. Mason Gillis was a guy, again, I would say he was probably the first guy on Duke's board in terms of priority. Because of the experience, there was chatter about him even at the Final Four about would he play another year or not? Would he be done? Would he come back? Had kind of phased out of that group with Purdue. And Duke was on him very early because, again, you get the experience, you get the 3-and-D. He's a guy who could potentially start, doesn't have to. He provides the 3-point shooting that you need around Cooper Flag. Again, sort of all works together. The other thing I should say with those 2 guys is they can defend 4s, and that frees Cooper Flag up to be more of a center fielder sometimes. Duke is going to try to allow Cooper Flag. That's where he's at his best defensively. Going to try to allow him to play some more center field type stuff, just where he can be more of a help defender. You don't want him picking up ridiculous, unnecessary fouls, defending guys who are just bigger and stronger than he is. And then Sion, you were looking for another guard because you desperately needed another guard. And you get a guy with size, you get a guy, again, with experience, high character, is going to hold the other 2 accountable. And again, if there's a game, we saw it this year in games where Tyrese Proctor, Caleb Foster struggled, Shire wasn't afraid to park them. And Sion is a guy who, if you need to park one of them for a game, you do it and you can still play through that guy. So they all kind of had different trajectories. Mason was definitely the one they were on first, but we're very clearly targeted. Even as those guys were sort of clearing out of the program, it was, okay, these are the needs we are trying to fill.
On the Brotherhood podcast a couple weeks ago, John Shire said to Jay Billis that they had a, kind of a, not necessarily a running list, but kind of a wants and needs of what they needed from this roster. And Mason Gillis was like the number 1 guy. And they said, we need a guy like Mason Gillis. We need a guy like Mason Gillis the whole, second half of the season. And then when Mason Gillis became available, he said he was on the phone 1 minute later with Matt Painter. Like, when we talk about some of the qualities, I think one thing you haven't touched on is the leadership aspect of things. Is that also something that they were looking at with these 3 recruits, especially considering that, Tyrese Proctor was coming back, but the rest of the leadership void was ever present with some of these guys that were leaving.
Yeah, Tyrese Proctor was a captain last year, but is he, a rah, light you on fire guy? Not necessarily.
Right, exactly.
Jeremy Roach was not necessarily that guy either. Ryan Young, very diplomatic, not necessarily that personality. And let me be clear, like Cooper Flag is going to set the intensity tone for this team. He's going to. He is a maniacal competitor, like dream competitor mindset. He is going to set the tone there. Gillis is the guy who is going to be able to hold others accountable and say, you want to play in the national championship game? I just did that. Here's what it takes. You're not doing it right now. You have to be better. And it's a lot different when that's coming from a guy who has played, 8 years of college basketball and just played in the national championship game. Seriously, it makes a difference. North Carolina saw that last year. They had a guy in Armando Bacot who had done all this, wasn't like a rah-rah leader. He had done all that, was not going to be the one inspiring the troops. And they bring in Cormac Ryan, who had, done a lot of losing and said, listen, I'm not putting up with this BS. You need those personalities. And so Gillis, I think, is going to do it a little more diplomatically probably than that. But he's a guy who can hold everybody accountable. And again, yes, Tyrese Proctor is a junior, but he's a reclassified junior. He is very, very young. Caleb Foster is very, very young. We're talking about a team that's potentially going to start still 3 freshmen, even freshmen who are as good as like a Cooper Flag and who have the potential of a come on. So you need those other guys in the room to say, look, here's how you do it. Here's how you don't burn yourself out in January. Here's how when you're stumbling in February, you get it back together in time for March. Duke has a non-conference gauntlet. Those guys are going to, it's sort of inevitable. They're not going to win all those games. That's impossible. When you lose one of those games, how do you respond? How do you prevent one loss from becoming 4? That's what those guys can teach them that, just strictly you have to have been there and done that. And so they're invaluable in that respect.
Okay, so while you were talking, I must have written down 5 follow-up questions that I have. But I want to start with this one. You've mentioned this notion of starting. Who do you think, right now, based on your intel, who do you think are the starters for Duke? I'm guessing that there are 3 of them that are pretty much locked in Proctor, Foster, and Flag, right?
I would add a 4th. I would add Kaman in there. I think from
you think even as raw as he is, he's
because you do have somewhat limited options. The front court is talented, but not necessarily the deepest position on the roster. Pat Ngongba is going to play next year. They're not redshirting him. He is coming in to play next year. But is he going to be ready to? I don't think he's.
Yeah, no. We saw from the FIBA Americas where he didn't even start for that team, for the U18 team there, that he's probably not. It's going to take him a little longer.
Yeah. And again, I would add this. Do you guys know how many freshman starters there were in the Final Four this year?
I'm going to go 0.
1. Stephon Castle.
Yeah. Yes.
You know how many there were the year before that?
0.
So it is a thing. You need to make sure you're insulating those guys. Definitely Proctor and Foster will be your backcourt. Flag will be in there. I still believe Kaman will be in there just because, you're building for the long term. You want to create stability and get guys into roles. That last spot's up for grabs. 100% up for grabs. It could go a million different ways. Could it end up being Mason Gillis where he's at the 3-4, Flags at the 3-4, he shoots, provides some experience? Maybe. Could it end up being the best shooter of Isaiah Evans, Con Knuppel, and Darren Harris? Absolutely, it could. Could it maybe end up being a Malik Brown if you want to go super long and if he shows he can be something of a dependable 3-point threat? Maybe, potentially. Right now, I would say that it would probably, if I had to, peg it now, I'd probably say either Gillis or one of Knuppel, Evans, or Harris would fill that role. You really want to have shooting around Cooper Flag to make sure he's got the space. Tyrese Proctor's got to be better there. Caleb Foster's got to be more consistent there. You have games where he'd have 5 threes and he'd have games where he was 0 for 5 from 3. You need to make sure you've got some more, leveling room. Kaman is not doing that. That's not a thing. And Cooper Flag can shoot. He is not necessarily a shooter. So I think probably it ultimately ends up going to whichever of those freshmen is most capable of shooting. And if none of them impressed, then you've got Mason Gillis right there to go. But the other 4, I think, I feel confident about those other 4 right now.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and just ask this. I'm surprised you don't seem all that high on Sion James. The intel that I've gotten is that Sion is like maybe one of the best players in the team from the jump.
He is. He's great. The thing is, you've got to look at the roster construction, and he's a guy who's still going to play 20 minutes a night. But if you start him as well, who are your backup guards?
I mean, I guess it's Khan, or the other thing is if you bring in a Khan or an Evans, and you just move Sion and Proctor and Foster around a little bit. I mean, but I hear you. You're right.
Cooper Flagg is going to be handling the ball a lot, as he should be, and as he needs to be. The other two, and Tyrese is going to be handling the ball a lot. How much Caleb's handling it, we'll see. If he ends up getting relegated to more of a spot-up shooting role, it wouldn't shock me. But he's got to be able to beat people off the dribble better than he did last year for that to even materialize. Sion, I think, is a guy who, again, depending on whichever of those is not giving you what you need, comes in, can do that, can handle the ball. You know, the handling creation thing, it's great. It's great with the starters if you have that, if you add him in there and make him the fifth starter. But then your bench is seriously lacking ball handling and creation. You know, it's not about playing your best 5 players all the time. It's about playing your best fit. You know, I could Malik Brown or Mason Gillis end up being one of the 5 most important players on this team? Sure. You know, I think in terms of like raw talent, could you make the argument that Evans is one of those 5? Sure. But like, is he maybe better relegated as a second unit scorer? Maybe. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people like were probably frustrated about last year. And with some of the guys who left was like, oh, these guys are so talented. They have this pedigree. They're awesome. And like, yes, but like they have all this talent, but they're not ready to actually contribute to winning yet. And in terms of a competition, like you didn't necessarily have that to the same extent that I think you're going to have it this season. Like if there was a word that I would use to define Duke's offseason, it would be competition. That's the biggest thing this staff wanted to.
We've discussed that a lot. Yeah.
This summer.
So Brendan, really quick. So you think you're saying that K2 and Evans, maybe Harris, are better prepared than TJ Power was a year ago, than Sean Stewart was a year ago to compete with the regulars?
I think they're going to be forced to compete more. You know, things were relatively locked in last year. That's why you saw the rotation shorten as much as it did, especially once Caleb Foster got hurt at the end of the year. You knew who was playing and who wasn't. There wasn't any competition. Nobody was pushing anybody. You know, that project I was telling you guys about that I'm working on in terms of NIL and the portal, there are some schools who, the way they structure their NIL pay allocations, if you are 8th in the depth chart, you get paid the 8th most money. And there is no movement in terms of your money or in terms of your role. That's it. You are locked in April for all of next year. And I don't love that if I was a player. I don't love that if I was a player. You know, some guys will say, listen, I'll take the money and that's great, especially when the money is that great. But I think you're just talking about a situation where like there is genuinely a starting spot for a national championship contender that is up for grabs. If that does not bring out the best in everybody, then that's on them. That is not on the opportunity that's there. Versus, I think, you know, like with some of these guys, like who are coming back, if some of those guys had come back, you know, like who fits in there? Would it have been a Power? Would it have been a Stewart? I think they all kind of wanted similar assurances. And that is not going to be there. That I think is the thing I'm trying to make clear, that nothing is guaranteed for these guys. And hopefully that overall competition raises the readiness for all of them.
We got more coming with Brendan Marks, but let's pause it right here. On the other side of this break, we bring Brendan back to talk more Duke basketball.
Hey, Duke fans, warmer, sunnier days are here. Fuel up for them with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for the summer thanks to Factor's menu of chef-crafted meals.
Jason, I can tell you Factor has so many options, more than 35 meals and 60 add-ons each week. So I never got tired of eating the same thing every day. You won't be needing to constantly clean pots or pans, and you'll be ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Just pop it in a microwave, and you're ready to go.
So head to factormeals.com/DukeBB50 and use that code DukeBB50 to get 50% off your first box. That is a great deal. And then you also get 20% off your next month. That's factormeals.com/DukeBB50 for 50% off your first box and 20% off your next month with Factor meals.
So get to eating great food and be on the way to your health goals with Factor.
This episode of the Duke Basketball Roundup is sponsored by BetterHelp.
Wow, the year feels like it's flown by. As we enter the summer, it is the time to take note of the wins that life has brought you. And it's a good time to make adjustments for the rest of 2024. Talking to someone about those wins and improvements can help you recalibrate and give you something to focus on for the remaining months of the year.
That's right, Donald. That's where BetterHelp can provide the alley-oop. Getting advice from a therapist can help you keep the focus on the good things in life and learn how to handle the hard better. It's online, it's flexible, and you get to fit it within your schedule. You just fill out a questionnaire and you get matched to a professional that can serve as your guide, and you can switch anytime you wish.
So if you need help setting those goals to carry you through 2024, try BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/DukeBB. That's DUKEBB today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/DukeBB.
High Five Casino.
High Five Casino is a social casino with real prizes and big Vegas hits at highfivecasino.com. The hottest games right from Vegas, and all winnings go straight to your bank account. Hundreds of exclusive games, free daily rewards, and come back to get free coins every 4 hours. Only at highfivecasino.com.
High Five Casino is a social casino. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Play responsibly. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details at high5casino.com.
High Five Casino.
The following is a high five moment from highfivecasino.com.
I won! Yahoo! Private, put down your phone. This is the Army.
Sarge, High Five Casino is a social casino. It's on your phone. Goes wherever you go. I win free spins, cash, prizes, free daily rewards, over 1,200 games. I won again.
Platoon, present cell phone. High Five.
High Five
Casino.
Casino.
Win at highfivecasino.com.
High Five Casino is a social casino. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Play responsibly. Conditions apply. See website for details.
High Five Casino.
So, Brent, I'm going to do a hypothetical for you for a second, because last year when we were discussing this team, one of the things that we were super, I guess one thing that was a big topic throughout the year was the inconsistency from shooting deep, right? Like 3-point shooters, like we had great 3-point shooters, but like you mentioned, there'd be games where 3-point shooting would completely disappear. And then there'd be some games where it felt like we couldn't miss. Take all the names off the jerseys, right? Like all the guys of this current roster. Is shooting at the top of what John Shire is looking for in that fifth starter? Is that the thing that's going to get somebody into that starting role? Or is it something else, another attribute that he's maybe looking at when considering who could be that fifth person?
I would say shooting and defensive versatility are 1A and 1B. Shooting is 1A. Just because, again, it sounds weird saying this about a freshman, especially when I'm telling you that there's only been one freshman starter in the last 2 Final Fours.
Right.
But Cooper Flagg is not those guys. I mean, I've seen him for multiple years now. Have seen him enough in person. Went up to Maine and spent time with him back in January. Like he is a different breed. Like NBA teams are already talking as they enter free agency. Okay, do we really want to give that guy a big contract, or do we want to put ourselves in the Cooper Flagg sweepstakes? I mean, he is seen as one of the best American-born prospects in the last at least decade, if not more. So everything is being built around him. And the things that he's best at are his body control and his finishing ability inside are like unreal, like video game-esque. Like sometimes when you play like 2K and you're driving and you hit the green bar and there's like no way in real life that shot's going in. He makes those shots goes in.
He's the guy that you create before you start playing the game and add to your team. He's the 99 in all attributes guy. Yeah.
He makes, not in shooting, but everything else basically. But even when I spent time with him and his coaches from Montverde in Maine in January, he had one game against, I think it was Oak Hill, and he had like 25 points, 9 rebounds, 7 assists, and 5 or 6, 7, 8 blocks, whatever. It was a crazy game. And after the game and the post game, they're harping on him about his ball handling and it not being tight enough because they're saying next year, Jimmy Butler and Marcus Smart are taking that ball from you. That's already the mindset. Is like we're not preparing you for college. Like those guys are going to take the ball. You have to get your handle lower and tighter because Jimmy Butler is going to steal it from you, and he's who's going to be defending you. Like that's the headspace that I think fans should be in with Cooper Flag. And so everything has to be maximized around him. His body control and finishing is insane. His handling has gotten better. It's not the best, which is why I think, having a guy like Proctor next to him is going to be huge. The shooting has come a long way. It's not 100% there yet. So yes, shooting 100% to give him space to complement those other two guys. And then again, defensively, you cannot have a defensive weak link. That is what this team is going to be built on. The identity of this team is going to be defense. It is going to be a top five. I mean, if John Shire had his way, they'd be the best defense in the country.
They've got that potential for sure.
That is the goal, especially with the length they have. And so those two things, those are the things that are going to be the separators, which is why, like Evans probably can give you the shooting. Can he give you the defense? Gillis can give you probably a high quality of both, but is an elite level. I don't know about that. Harris can give you the shooting. Is he physically and athletically there where he can give you the defense? I think people should not sleep on Khan. I think Khan has a legitimate chance. But those would be the two skills that I'd say in that fifth starter are going to be emphasized.
I will say we are 2 years removed from having a freshman starter on the Duke team in the Final Four, in Paulo Banchero, and I'm hoping that Cooper Flag two. Yeah,
AJ,
you're right.
AJ.
Yeah. So the numbers are skewed over the last couple of years, but it feels like people can, at least it's still a recent memory to remember freshmen leading a team. Brendan, when you think about these guys that are on the team, we mentioned, let's go back to the transfer for a second. We had the four. Obviously, Cameron Sheffield is not going to be a guy that factors much into his rotation. But of those three guys, who do you think, the Mason Gillis, Malik Brown, and Sion James, if you picked one of them to start tomorrow, season starts tomorrow, which one do you think is starting, or if it's multiple?
I'd pick Mason because he gives you the shooting. He's low usage, which, you're talking about two guys in Tyrese and Cooper who are going to need the ball in their hands a lot. So having a guy off ball who is comfortable doing that, Gillis is money from the corners, which I think is going to be just, having that guy just in the pocket is going to be hugely valuable. And defensively, again, I got some heat from some college basketball colleagues of mine when he committed, saying that he could maybe guard some fives. He's never really guarded fives before. I don't think it's inconceivable he will be asked to, but he can guard fours. He's big enough. He's strong enough, knows the college game well enough that he can guard fours and let Cooper Flag, handle some of those threes who may be a little bit quicker, but are not going to be as strong. So I think that Mason just really fits that roster. Whether you would call him the 3 or the 4 doesn't really matter. It's going to be interchangeable, but I would say of those, just because, again, those are the two things he provides. He provides shooting and defense. I would say he would be the front runner of those three, and maybe the front runner overall, depending on how those three freshmen we were talking about come on.
Hey, Brennan, last question I have about Duke. And I know you, obviously you observe the ACC extensively, but I know you watched the entire college basketball world a little bit. I'll freely admit I'm a little surprised that most of the national prognosticators, the preseason polls, so to speak, tend to have Duke like 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that kind of ballpark. I know that part of that is, as you said, freshmen. No one wants to, like, freshmen have become like a bad word in college basketball now. But I kind of want to go, well, wait a second, but Duke has freshmen who are going to be picked in the top 3 in the draft. One of them's going to go number 1. The other one's going to go top 3, top 5. Like, that's a different breed of freshman, isn't it? So where do you think this team should fall right now? I don't know. I'm a Dookie. I see people putting us like 9, and I'm just like, what do you see? What am I missing to think that this team feels to me like a top 3 team for sure?
Yeah, well, I top 3 I struggle with. I would not say top 3 because there's a lot of really good old teams that are back. Like Alabama's roster is insane this year. Alabama is absolutely loaded this year. But then again, you've got teams like, Houston, returns a lot of pieces from last year, brings in Milos Uzan from Oklahoma to basically be the Jamal Shed replacement. The rest of the roster's back. They had a lot of guys who were injured last year. Like Houston is going to be awesome. Iowa State again had a top 2 defense in the country last year. You bring back Lipsey, you bring back Gilbert, you add Joshua Jefferson from St. Mary's. Like I really, really like Iowa State too. I'm done discounting UConn. If somebody transfers or signs with UConn, I just assume they're good. Even if I haven't seen them play, Dan Hurley's going to get the benefit of the doubt. Liam McNeely, Cooper's high school teammate at Montverde, one of the best high school players in the country, a great shooter. Aiden Mullaney, coming from St. Mary's, like, again, just an awesome fit. Like, so you look at all of those. And so like I had Duke, we did a college basketball mailbag a couple of weeks ago, and it was who's your preseason top 5. And in no particular order, I did have Duke in my top 5 because I believe in Cooper to that extent. I've seen him more than I think a lot of people have. And I really believe in what the defense is going to be. Offensively, I'm kind of going to need to wait and see it. But defensively, I think this is going to be a top 5 defense in the country. The length is going to absolutely, just stifle people. It's going to smother them. And I think it's also a team that is young enough that it can get significantly better from the start of the year to the end of the year.
Right. If we play Alabama in December, Alabama's probably winning. But I feel like this team come March, man, come on.
Yeah, I mean, Kansas. Kansas is absolutely loaded. They get Rylan Griffin late in the process, 3-and-D guy from Bama. I loved him. He torched Carolina in the Sweet 16. So I definitely would not say top 3. There are just too many experienced teams who are bringing back their cores, and realistically, Duke's bringing back 2 guys. I believe in Cooper enough that I'd probably still have him in the top 5. I would say 10 is probably a little bit low, but in that 5 to 8 spot, to me, does not seem unfair. Just because, again, you are still counting on freshmen to make serious contributions, and as we saw last year, that's not a guarantee. Cooper Flag is one of one. Kaman has incredible potential. The rest of the guys are in that 10 to 20 mix, and that can be hit or miss. So it sounds good on paper, but I really think that, 4 to 8 is probably about where I'd have them if I were making my preseason top 10 right now.
Brendan, last thing I have on the rankings question, it kind of leads into John Shire. Now, I don't think this is something that you are taking note of, but I do think there are some people out there who aren't giving a John Shire-led Duke team the same kind of respect that they were giving a Coach K-led team with similar turnover, right? Like we'd have a whole team come in and come out and they'd still be top 3 because, Coach K was the GOAT. Do you think, and it feels like to me, and I know, Jason, we've talked about this, it feels like John Shire and the coaching staff have taken this coming year, personally as well, that they know that they need to show that as a staff, they're still a young staff, that they want to show that they are improving as a coaching staff and that they should be getting the respect that, that Coach K and the other staff did before that. Do you see it that way? Is that your sense that this team is shaping up not just as, of course, the players, but also the coaching staff is saying, this is on us to make sure we get this right?
Yeah, I don't think Duke is getting the conventional Duke bump that it used to get with Coach K. And quite frankly, until John Shire wins a national title, until anybody wins a national title, they don't get that bump. Matt Painter has been one of the best coaches in the sport for 20 years, and people have kept saying, okay, well, he's a guy who can't get over the hump. Mark Few has been one of the best coaches in the sport, hasn't won a title. How much of a benefit of the doubt is Gonzaga still getting? So it's tricky, and obviously John is very young. I will say this. John was invited to be on the staff at Team USA. I think that shows how well respected he is just amongst his peers. I think Jay Lucas is probably one of the best assistant coaches in the country, not just from a recruiting standpoint, but I think last year, these are not Jay's words by any means, but I just get the sense. I got the sense from watching him, from watching the team, that after the absolute defensive juggernaut that those guys had in year one, that last year not being able to replicate that level of intensity or resistance was frustrating, which is why I think you've now seen this very intentional pivot back towards that first model. And I think Jay is going to make the most of that. The other thing I would add is this is the first year that John Shire's got continuity on his staff. This is the first year he's got the same staff.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, having Dildy in the system for a year, I think that's going to pay huge dividends. Like, so I don't know, the proving yourself thing. Like, I kind of think that John got past that in year one, to be honest. You win the ACC championship in your first year, you go on that 10-game run that they did. I mean, I think Derek Lively, as he's shown in the NBA, but I mean, I thought by the end of his freshman season, I know he didn't have a great, offensive production, especially in the NCAA tournament. I thought he was the best defender in college basketball by the end of the year. And that's as much on him as it was Duke's staff getting him from the ball of clay we saw in November to the absolute beast that he was in March. So I don't know that, the prove it thing, yeah, to some extent. Obviously you want, like, I think that the fan base is probably frustrated that you lost twice to NC State in a month. I get that. I get that you were on the brink of a Final Four and you couldn't get past NC State. I think that's frustrating. But I think for the staff, I don't really think they're thinking about it in that terms at all. I don't think they're thinking about prove it or any of that. I think they are very aware that they have a team that can win a national championship. They have the pieces. It's on them to make the pieces become, the best possible sum. And I think they're locked in, and the fact that they've gotten the continuity is a huge thing from everything that I'm aware of. So I don't know that there's this external motivation to prove it. John is not going to get the Coach K bump. He'd have to have a Dan Hurley run to get that bump. There's going to be the Dan Hurley bump now because what they've done. But I don't think he has to prove it. I think what they're capable of accomplishing will sort of prove it in and of itself.
Jason, first of all, wow.
Yeah.
We could have gone longer with that because it was just such a fascinating interview that we had with Brendan Marks. We really thank him for coming on, but also, ladies and gentlemen, just a tease. That is part 1 of 2. There is going to be a second part of that interview that we're going to air in an episode early next week. So again, lock in your feeds because we're going to have another episode coming very soon with Brendan Marks. But Jason, focusing on what he talked about on the Duke basketball side of things, we've talked a lot over the last couple of weeks about how Sion James has been that guy that everyone has has said is going to emerge to be the starter. But it sounds like that this 5th starter position is completely up for grabs, that there's a lot of guys who can be reaching out with their hands to try and grab it, and B, that Mason Gillis might be the one whose hand is a little bit closer than the others.
Yeah, I loved what Brendan had to say about competition and the fact that Duke brought in guys, A, who are able to compete, and B, who want to compete and who understand that the guy who plays the best is the guy who's going to. There are no promises. There are no guarantees on this Duke roster. I thought that was fascinating to hear him talk about. And then the other thing, look, Donald, you and I, we go on and on and on talking about this constantly. Cooper Flag, Cooper Flag, Cooper Flag. When you hear a guy like Brendan Marks, who, first of all, covers the entire ACC, works with people who cover all of college basketball. This is not a homer perspective. Everything you and I say is tinged by Duke blue glasses. Mm-hmm. Brendan Marks does not wear anyone's glasses. And he's out here telling you. Yeah, right. Yeah, he wears his own glasses. Yes. For folks who can't see him, Brendan does wear glasses. But no, for him to be saying the things he was saying about Cooper Flag is one of one. There's no one else like him. Best, American prospect we've seen in college basketball in more than a decade. He's talking Anthony Davis. He's talking, we're talking almost 15 years. I don't know how you cannot be super excited. And the really interesting thing to me about it is, he was very clear about Duke's going to try and free Cooper Flag up to be a rover. I mean, it's impossible not to think about sort of the role that Shane Battier played for Duke in that kind of way. When Duke went on the magical national title run in 2001, Shane Battier was that rover kind of role. And that's kind of the thing they're envisioning for him, and how much Brendan Marks says Cooper Flag's going to have the ball in his hands. I think it's really interesting that you could sort of sense from him that Caleb Foster's not going to handle the ball that much. It's going to be Tyrese Proctor and Cooper Flag. And we're not talking about like Cooper bringing the ball up the court. But I think once you bring the ball over half court, that ball's getting in Cooper's hands, and he's going to be asked to create things for himself and for his teammates. And he is clearly a truly special player because this is a Duke team with tons of talent, and they're going to put the ball in that freshman's hands a lot.
In KenPom terms, usage rate very, very high when it comes to Cooper Flag. He's
exactly
going to have the possession ended with the ball in his hands at least at some point throughout a lot of the season. The other thing about Cooper Flag, real quickly, is that I really liked the perspective that Brendan Marks provided on how they are approaching his development. They are not talking about how he's going to deal with college kids. They're talking about how he's going to deal with, as Brendan Marks said, Jimmy Butler, right? And if you think about it that way, it actually makes a lot of sense because, yeah, he may be able to get away with some stuff in high school or in college that he got away with in high school, right? There may be some things he has to tweak, but he's looking towards the next level, and he knows that this is a way, if he gets better by NBA standards, he's going to be otherworldly talent by college standards. And so he's hoping to kind of use this year to develop in a way, but also, like he said, he's a competitor beyond imagination. And everyone who has talked about him has said that this man does not like to lose. This man is a fiery competitor, and he wants to win badly. And that is going to be infectious with his team. I think the other thing, Jason, that I thought about that was very, very fascinating was the type of guys that we brought in through the transfer portal, and the leadership that they provide leads to one word: accountability. And again, something that and again, that when you talk about leadership and we talk about the different styles of leadership, there is no wrong way to be a leader, right? If you have the leadership quality, you can be a leader in many ways. Like we said, we could be a leader by example. You can, hey, I'm just going to go out here and do my 30 and everyone's going to follow me. You could be a fiery one, getting guys' faces, right? You know, throwing stuff around the locker room and making people understand why we're not the level that we're at. And then there's, you know, a approach of, I've done this, you haven't, follow me, because if you follow me, I know the road here that we need to take. And that's where Mason Gillis comes in, right? Where he's been to a national championship game. He's been on the bench. He's learned whatever roles that he's had. He had so many in his career. And to be a guy who can get in someone's face, like Sion James, not necessarily in a bad way, but to say like, hey guys, this is not the way we need to play if we want to get to this level. And I think those are all things that it sounds like John Shire and the coaching staff hit a home run on, and bringing in some of these guys that can provide a different leadership quality that we've had in the past that can hopefully help this team win.
Look, the last thing I'll say about what Brendan had to tell us was defense. He was very clear, I think. This is someone who is plugged in, you know, to programs like Duke and other programs in the ACC. He was very clear that John Shire and the coaching staff did not like the way Duke played defense this past year, that we weren't tough enough. We didn't have enough. We just didn't have enough on defense. And they wanted to get back to the team that Derek Lively was a part of. And that it feels like the goal for this team is, you know, I don't care if you don't have to be a top 5 offense, but you will be a top 5 defense. Probably John Shire would probably say you'll be a top 3 defense. And I'm fascinated by that because we've seen in the NCAA tournament Duke be befuddled by having poor shooting nights. I got news for you, Donald. Defense never takes a night off. If you are great at if you're great at defense, it travels. It goes to every single game. And I think that's why John Shire has put together a roster that is going to be incredibly dynamic on defense.
Effort, heart, defense, you know, competitive spirit. We heard a lot of those buzzwords over the last year, and those are all big focus keys of emphasis this offseason and through this summer as this team gets together. Jason, let's leave it here on episode 631 of the DBR podcast. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this is part 1 of our conversation with Brendan Marks. Coming up early next week, we will continue our conversation with him. We will focus more on the ACC at large with the transfer portal and just how other teams have been. Jason, give him a little tidbit of what we can expect.
Yeah, look, this is a Duke podcast, but I know everyone out there wonders about Carolina. Brendan Marks has some very, very candid comments about the way the Carolina roster is put together. And I'll just go ahead and say it. He sees a major hole, a major problem for Carolina next season. And it's going to be really interesting to talk to him about it.
Yeah. And he also dives into some of the teams in the ACC that as Duke fans, we kind of see, but we don't always get to really do a deep dive on. So it's going to be a very, very fascinating conversation.
Yeah, I'm surprised. He's very high on NC State. I'll go ahead and tease that. He's high on NC State, which surprised me a little bit. I didn't expect that, but sounds like, he thinks State can be right up there.
He tells a great story about a recruiting trip that for NC State during the week of the Final Four. So you don't want to miss that again. Early next week, we will have part 2 of that conversation. But that will do it for this episode of the DVR podcast. Jason, thank you as always for being here. I am Donald Blind, and now it is time for the Duke band to play us out and take us home.